This is John for the Everyday Fan Sports. Today, I have the pleasure of being on the beat with Jenna Becerra, softball player, softball guru, I guess I could call you, softball podcaster. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I can't believe, that the season's over, the softball or the college softball season, but it's fun to at least still have pro to watch.
Well, I was definitely going to get to that because I definitely want to hear your opinions on. I know we're talking about AUX and there's also the WPF. But before we get into that, just a little bit of background on you. You played softball at Stanford, and you were a very versatile player. Was that by design, or did that just sort of happen?
I was like probably a lot of infielders who were recruited to college where I played shortstop my whole life. I actually pitched as well, and I was recruited as an infielder and a pitcher. So my freshman year, I was in the bullpen as well. But then after that, just focused on, being in the lineup as a regular position player. But I think for me, it wasn't necessarily by design by me, but it was, because I have the ability to play so many different positions and to do it well, it definitely gave an extra sort of X factor for the team and how we could kind of put together different defenses. And I think, it increases your chance of being able to play too. And it did help me do that because I played third, first, second. I played right field a little bit. I even went into center field for an inning when someone got hurt one time early on. And I think it's just a good way to, I don't know, to find a way to be able to contribute to your team.
And did that make it harder not knowing which position you might play, or was that just kind of part of the excitement?
I think probably both. I really settled into infield after my freshman year. And the positions are more different from each other than people would think, even first and third, even second base and shortstop. But I think at times it was difficult because I hit right-handed naturally, but I also would slap a little bit lefty. So sometimes I would be on deck and I'd be kind of waiting for the signal from my coach as I was coming up to the plate as to whether I'd hit right-handed or left-handed. And so that could sometimes be difficult because then you're on deck swinging both ways. So that was a little tougher. But then later on, just stuck with hitting right-handed and had a good end to my career too. So
So that's interesting. So when you were switch hitting, it was the coach's decision on an individual at bat which way you're going to hit.
it was at the time, yes. He would tell me either to turn around or to, just stay right there and hit right-handed. So yeah, it was, I'd have my, elbow protector on just in case I was going to hit left-handed, and then I'd take it off if I wasn't.
Okay. Now, since your college playing career, you've gone on to do a lot of things. You've gone on to do a lot of media things, I should say. You've been a broadcaster, you've been an analyst, you've done some podcasting. When did you realize that you wanted to get into that field?
Yeah, I was lucky to actually stick around at Stanford after my 4 year playing career was over. I did what's called a co-term or a co-terminal degree. So you can actually start your graduate degree during undergrad and then finish grad school in a year. So I actually did that. And during that 5th year, I wasn't playing softball. So I had like more time to explore other things that I wanted to do. So for me, what that looked like is I ended up trying, I did some sideline reporting for the athletic department for football games for the Cardinal channel, the YouTube channel for Stanford Athletics. And then come time for softball season and baseball season to roll around, the student radio station KZSU asked me if I'd be interested. And I said, sure, why not? I was going to go kind of root on my teammates anyway at the game. So why not get to talk about it? And I was a communication major and I did study media studies as my focus in grad school. So it was pretty aligned with things that I like to do, as well as one of my favorite things to watch and to talk about, which was softball.
And did how did you replace like the thrill of softball, playing the charge you get from softball? How did you replace that in your next roles?
It's hard. I don't know if you can replace it exactly, like if it's the exact same thing. That's one of the hardest things to do, actually, when you kind of transition from being an athlete to no longer actually competing in that way. But you do still get, or at least for me, a sense of excitement, of pride. It's still a craft that you can devote yourself to. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it, just like you would practice as a player, whether that's hitting, defense, whatever it is. There's so many different aspects to broadcasting and even to podcasting. And you can still be a student of the game, quote unquote, in that way. And I enjoyed that part of being a player. So being able to do that as someone in the media is really fun. And I do think I take a lot of pride, and I'm very honored to be a part of these women's stories. Like, to me, that's a big deal. Like, I had my stories in college, and now some of their biggest moments that they're having, like, I might get to be a part of that and to tell their story and to kind of bring that moment to life on certain broadcasts. So to me, that's exciting too. I think that's a big deal. And it comes down to growing the game, which is the point of pretty much everything.
Oh, exactly. Which kind of brings us to one of your, I don't know if it's one of your latest, because I know you've been doing it for a few years now, but Bleav in Softball. How did that develop?
It's funny because it was right before COVID really hit. It was like early 2020. And I had seen a posting on LinkedIn for podcast hosts. They were looking for different sports. They liked, Bleav likes to also try to get people who actually played on a team to talk about a team, or who played a sport to talk about a sport. And so I was like, oh, wow, okay, this is very relevant. So why not? I had been thinking about doing a sort of recurring content series at that point, because I had also decided, like, okay, I'm going to focus my career on just sports broadcasting and sports media now. Because prior to that, I had worked in tech, coming from Silicon Valley with Stanford. I worked at LinkedIn actually.
Oh, wow. Okay.
5 years. And then I had decided to make that change. And that's how it came about. I just talked with them and pitched the idea of a softball podcast. They didn't have any softball podcasts at the time, and just kind of got started. And so used Zoom and things right before everybody started using Zoom. And then it was very common after that.
It did help. I mean, that's one of the funny things, I mean, COVID had a lot of obviously bad effects, but one of the cool things was this, and it really opened the media field up to a lot of opportunities.
Yeah. And I think less pressure for production value. Like, I think we probably all overanalyze that a little bit at times before, but then when it was like, oh, well, we don't have all the options of in person, I think people just appreciated content over, maybe some of the shinier stuff.
Total. And the thing that I liked about what you do is, actually, there's two things I like about it. First of all, you started, a few years back. When a lot of people start podcasts, they'll start off great, and then like they'll do 4 or 5 episodes or whatever. Then it lags and it lags, and eventually it ends. And you have over 100, so the duration that you've kept up is fantastic, and also the varied subjects, the varied interview subjects that you do. Obviously, you've gotten some really big names, and you've gotten some, no disrespect to them, some lesser known names, but they all have interesting stories, and I think it's fantastic that you cover all that. How do you go about picking your various guests?
Yeah, I appreciate that, because that is something that I try to be cognizant of. I mean, as you know, like, doing things like this, you have to be really flexible because people have different schedules and things like that. But I try to be thoughtful about, like, the breadth of which, like, not only the backgrounds of the interviewees who come on, but also just the topics we talk about. But for me, I think some of it ends up being timely. Like, I was so lucky, for example, a couple of years ago, right after Mike Candrea announced his retirement, I just kind of was like, well, I'll shoot my shot. And I reached out to Arizona to try to get him on the podcast, and he actually said yes. So I got to talk to him like right after that. So some of it's sort of the timeliness of that, but I also, I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in being almost like too timely. Like, if you're always trying to, you want to do that to a certain degree, but sometimes I also just want to, have good conversations. So I think for me, it's about following the game. So I watch the games, whether that's college, pro, international, if that's available. And I kind of see the storylines. I follow things on social media. And then I want to get to know the person beyond just that presence, like them on the field and them on social media. And it's actually been one of the most fun parts about it, is I feel like I've made new friends and like built new relationships. And I actually got to meet some of them in person for the first time this season, because it had been so much Zoom before that.
Right.
But, getting to see them in person has been really great. So I try to look for the stories, but I just try to pay attention. I think that's kind of the biggest thing.
And I'm not looking for any names. I'm not looking to bury anybody. But have you ever had like a really bad interview where the person you're talking to just either gives you like two-word answers, or just is completely devoid of emotion? Have you ever had those, and how do you get through those?
I have had some where you definitely have to pull more out. So like you have to definitely ask more of the questions, really lead the conversation. I think I've noticed that sometimes the younger ones who are still playing college, they may be just not as used to doing these interviews yet. Whereas you talk to some of these pros and it's like, oh gosh, they've done this a million times and they're very comfortable with themselves too, and also their presence in these conversations. I think for me, it's just to keep going, and just I also, I do have questions that I write down where I'm like, oh, I'd really like to ask these to that particular person. But I think listening is really important, and that can get lost too in roles like ours, because sometimes it's like if someone gives you an answer, they might give you some really cool information, and if you're not really listening and just thinking about the next question, you miss that. So I try to like leave space to open that up as well. So asking follow-up questions sometimes to some of the ones who are maybe a little less vocal is helpful, and just doing the research beforehand. I'm very prepared. People have like joked like, hey, are you stalking me? I remember Ronda
I've had
Rebel said
that.
that. It's like,
Exactly.
yeah, and so then I know things that I know I want to ask about, so I can always like revert to that too if something doesn't go as in depth as I thought it would.
And is it hard? I know sometimes, like when I'm interviewing a lot of softball players within a short period of time, is it hard for you sometimes to not fall or to avoid falling into the trap of asking like the same 3 or 4 questions, at least at the beginning, like how did you get started? If things like that. How do you avoid falling into that trap?
Yeah, it's easy to get into that because I think for me too, I've had several people on more than once, but for the most part, um, people have only been on one time. So it's like you want to get their entire story in, and it's not possible to get someone's entire life story into 1 hour, let's say at
Exactly.
most. So I think I'm just trying to think about like, well, what's something that I can talk to them about that I couldn't really talk to maybe that many other people about, versus like, oh, I could ask that question to almost anybody. And I think that's how I tried to direct it. And I got better at that over time. Like my first 10 episodes, probably it might be a little cringy if I listen to them now, but you just get better. It's like anything else. It's like reps too. So you just get better at doing that.
Well, I would encourage nobody to look at my like first, couple of years of interviews. So, so I mean, you are well ahead of my pace, believe me. So when you pursue somebody, say for a long time for an interview, and then you finally land that person, then like, is there a period afterwards where you kind of like a lull where you kind of like try to figure out almost like not a depression, that's way too strong of a word, but like how am I going to top that one?
Mm. Yeah, it's almost like when you finish binge watching a TV show you really like, and I think what's that commercial where it's like, oh, you're in a show hole, you like don't know what to do
Perfect.
next. Yes, I try to have like an ongoing list of people that I want to ask so I can keep moving, because I think that's the important part. It's like consistency, it's the key to it, but it's also the hard part about it. So, but for me, for example, like Lisa Fernandez was, I want to say, the second interview of this season, and she's someone that I always wanted to interview. She's like the only person, and I told her this story like in life where I actually was starstruck when I was like 10 years old and met her. And so that was a big deal and really fun, and it went really well, and you're kind of like, wow, that was, yeah, where do you go from here? And even Dot Richardson was similar the year before when she was actually the 100th episode, and it felt so fitting to have somebody like her.
Sure.
And it's like that's Lisa's hero, so it was very cool in that way. But I think what helped me too is like after I spoke with Lisa, for example, she's one of, again, the several who have been on the show more than once, but I actually talked to Stanford head coach Jessica Allister, who used to be my coach. And so
Oh,
I
cool.
think in that way, she was the next episode. It was sort of like, it got really personal, so it was just like a different angle. It's like, okay, well, I don't have to, get the the person that I'm starstruck around like every single week. It was like, and I'm sure some people might be starstruck with Coach Alistair. I just happen to have a personal relationship with her. And I think that was like definitely an interesting way to kind of take the next step afterwards.
No, I think that's great. And like I said before, I do love the variety of guests that you have on. So let's talk about the state of pro softball right now. I know you're familiar with AU Softball Athletes Unlimited. What is your opinion of they obviously have a unique scoring system for those who don't know, real in brief. You get points for everything you do. You get points for hits, strikeouts, et cetera, and then there's one champion at the end of the season. What was your original thought on that, and has it changed over the years?
I think my original thought, and it was such an interesting time when this was happening too, because this was happening in 2020 and ended up being essentially after February, early March, the only softball we got in 2020 was really
Right.
Athletes Unlimited. And we were lucky in the sense that it was sort of already set up as the single location in a bubble system. And that's what it is still, even without as many protocols and things like that. To me, I think when I first learned about some of like the points and things like that, it felt like, okay, so this is fantasy softball. And I think to a certain degree it is. But I talked with Gwen Svekis, who's essentially one of the first few, basically one of the founding players
Right.
for Athletes Unlimited softball recently. And we talked about how it's interesting because it's an individualized point system, but actually there's a lot of team dynamics that still factor in. And I thought that was really interesting to see play out because, they're making like unofficial team names every week. They are some of the pitchers and catcher combinations. They're trying to do that every week in the draft and still themselves up with the same people. And I think like it was interesting to me to see how the relationships and the dynamics like that still play a factor, even when it's, individualized, and that team stuff still matters. You still have to win innings and you can't do that by yourself. That has to be with the team. So that's something that I don't know if I anticipated that initially. That has been really cool to see.
So do you have a preference of, or do you just have room for all the softball? Because there is another league. With all due respect, there's the women's professional fast pitch.
Yeah.
They play traditional softball. Um, I love them both. If I had to choose which style, I'd probably choose traditional softball. I'll still go to every game I can. Don't get me wrong. Do you have a preference?
I think there's room for both in different ways. I would say we do need a centralized, maybe more traditional league to come to the forefront. I think obviously that's what the WPF is trying to do. Initially, before the NPF shut down because of all the COVID struggles, it was meant to be sort of supplementary to the NPF, which had been that centralized sort of league in the US for 17 or so years. And it didn't conflict with the schedule. For example, it was like once the NPF season was over, that's when AU was going to start playing. And I liked that type of concept because it's similar to the WNBA being centralized, for professional women's basketball players in the US. And then they can also play Athletes Unlimited because that's another sport that
Right.
AU happens to sponsor. So I think there's room for both. Of course, though, I do think we need something more centralized that can be that counterpart to the MLB, for example. So I'm obviously hopeful and supportive of the WPF to emerge as that because I think we deserve it as well.
I agree completely. Again, I will go to every game because I just love softball. But hopefully both leagues survive and are successful because the more softball, then it gives more opportunities for women in sports, and I think, and to grow the game, which I think is, we both agree that that's really the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
So what do you do when you're not broadcasting, when you're not podcasting, when you're not focused on softball? What do you do to get away from it and don't say you go to the park and play softball?
I don't go to the park and play softball. No, I would probably throw my arm out if I try. That's why I haven't played very many slow pitch games either, because I'm like, I secretly think I'm going to go out there and think I can do what I used to do and hurt myself. No, I spend a lot of time with family and friends. I try to. Um, it's not a lot of time to have during softball season. So I would say like right now, I'm still a little bit in recovery almost from college softball season.
Sure.
And that's because it's so long, going from the beginning of February to the beginning of June. That's like a solid 4 months of just straight softball every single week. And then you do have summer softball, but it's it's not as long of a season, not as many games. Athletes Unlimited in terms of AUX was 3 weeks, right? Versus 4 months. So that's a little bit easier to digest. So I try to just spend time with family and friends. I try to go on trips too. My extended family does a beach trip every year, every summer in Southern California. We're doing it again this year.
Nice.
Yeah, and I'll take trips. I've been to places like in Montana or in New York for summer trips, specifically in the mountains at the beach, and those are fun as well. So I try to just like get the quality time with
Before
people like
softball
that.
gears up again.
Exactly, that I don't always get to get during the season.
I understand completely. Listen, I really appreciate your time. I really, it's fun talking softball with you. Before I let you go, tell everybody where they can find out whatever you want. It's your turn to plug whatever you want.
I appreciate that. Yes, Bleav in Softball's on all the different podcast platforms, all the audio ones from Apple, Spotify, etc., including YouTube as well. So you can subscribe there. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Bleav in Softball, and that is spelled BLEAV, Bleav. And then you can follow me too on Twitter at Jenna Becerra01 or on Instagram at Jenna Becerra. And I'll be in touch too there.
Before I let you go, I did forget. What is the origin of the Bleav? The spelling and all that.
Yeah, well, it's Bleav Network. And so when I first joined the network, it's changed a lot in the last several years. I think I joined very early on in the days where they were just starting to add shows. And I actually have never asked them like why it is that they chose that and why they picked that. But that's because that's the name of it. There are many different shows that play on that. So it's not just Bleav in Softball. It's also like Bleav in Georgia Dogs, Bleav in Kentucky. And, these are some shows that I've actually even had a chance to jump on. And so it's just sort of had that theme to play off.
It is a cool name. It's catchy. I like it. Yeah. Really, I appreciate your time. Again, it's been a lot of fun. I encourage everyone to check out Bleav in Softball. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I love the variety and the depth that you go into with all your interview guests. I look forward to listening in the future. And with that, I wish you to have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.